I really hope you guys are as excited for Xenoblade 3 as I am, because that new trailer gives us a lot of information to be excited about. And even more than the trailer, on some random websites where you can pre-order the game, they have listed the premise of the game, which is probably the single most important thing we have learned about the game lore-wise, and helps put a lot of things together. In this video, I'd like to go over everything in the trailer along with all other new information as well as possible implications of this information. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you are looking for the #1 destination of all Xenoblade 3 guide content and coverage in the future, and just if you want to help me out because you like me. This video will feature some lore from previous games in the series, including Xenogears and Xenosaga, so if you really care about that, then you have been warned. Before we get into the full trailer analysis, we need to talk about the premise of the game. Now, on GameStop and other similar websites, we get a premise that states this: live to fight, and fight to live in a warring world with a dark secret. Every minute counts for the soldiers Vianios who are given a mere 10 years to live and fight. Join Noah and Mio, members of the opposing nations at the center of this conflict, on a heartfelt journey to end the cycle of violence. A group of 6 characters from these nations join together to awaken the colonies of Ionios to the underlying threat both nations faced. Traverse massive, fantastical sci-fi landscapes as you expose the true enemy, pulling the strings behind the conflicts. The soldiers of Ionios are given 10 years to live and fight. This is unironically the most crucial piece of lore, and this is where we learn it. Amazing. This puts a lot of things into context, like Mio worried about her limited time remaining, the entire plot point about fighting to live and living to fight, and it could also suggest things like fighting in order to reduce your time limit in order to keep fighting and live longer. It is very clear this world is a messed up place though, and the premise definitely makes the game very interesting, and I cannot wait to play it. It's also interesting that we have more focus on sci-fi than fantasy in the description, and of course the rest of the premise talks about how we're awakening both nations to the underlying threat, so there's definitely a more important enemy than the two nations, so that might suggest that Melia and Nia will end up being allies in the future, even if they initially start out as antagonists. With this premise in mind, it can also change some things in the trailer, which I'll discuss when we get there, so let's take a look at the trailer now. The trailer this time starts out with a panning shot to an entirely new character we have never seen before, and if Twitter is anything to go by, she is a new simping target of a lot of people. We have since found out that her name is Ethel, or Ethel. Her appearance with the current lighting could vaguely be a reference to Cosmos, although based on later appearances and official art, I would be hesitant to say that this is any kind of intentional reference. She appears to have a tattoo on her chest similar to Uni, and what's interesting is her tattoo has no red in it. I'll discuss implications of that a bit later in the video. One thing we can see here is that she normally has blue eyes, but her right eye seems to be glowing red. Based on the previous trailer, there was a line from Uni that involved filling up flickering clocks in her eyes, and this could potentially be the first instance we are seeing something like that. The zoom-in shot of her eye doesn't show anything that necessarily looks like a clock outside of a circular shape, but that's just the shape of eyes in general. The next shot, we see some terrain being destroyed by Keva's technology, which seems to be directed at and attacking the main party. This technology again bears slight resemblance to older face mechon, and there might be a semicircle underneath the red circles in this area. It is difficult to tell from this shot. One thing we can tell from the next clip is that the main party's weapons already seemingly have the Auroboris symbols on them. We don't know exactly what this means as of yet, but it is easy to assume it's after everyone has joined up. Ethel approaches the party and appears to use dual swords as a weapon type. This is a pretty rare weapon in the Xeno series, being used only by a pretty minor boss enemy, Orgula, and by Elma as one of her 2 weapons in Xenoblade X. These weapons appear to glow, being more saber-like in nature. The dialogue exchange here seems to suggest that Ethel is calling the main party monsters, and then Lanz responds saying to cut it out and that we're your friends. Now, based on a relationship chart that I'll go a bit more into detail later in the video, we know that Ethel is the chief of military in Colony 4, which is a colony somewhere in Kevis. She is known as Silver Ethel, which is suspiciously similar to another silver-haired sword character with a silver alias in a game I have played recently, but it does show that many characters will be getting official titles in this game. In the past, it appears she was Noah's superior, or at least a mentor, when he was a child soldier. The Kevis members of our parties are understandably confused as to why they're being attacked without any kind of explanation, but the next scene we get a point of view from Ethel showcasing the entire party seemingly looking like dark, shadowy figures giving off a fog-like complexion. We can assume that the red eye is likely what is causing her perception of the party to appear distorted in this way. Now let's talk about this perception. There are some striking similarities between how the party looks here in the Fog King and Atom Phantasms in Xenoblade 2. If you keep up with my videos at all, then you know I've stated in the past that the Fog King is almost certainly a Gnosis, and to give a brief lore rundown of how life in Xenosaga works and how it may appear to work in Blade, essentially every person exists in two domains. The real domain, where the real body exists and persists, and the imaginary domain, where the soul or consciousness itself resides. When the real body dies, the soul does not disappear completely, instead joining itself with a system known as the collective unconscious until reincarnation. The collective unconscious is essentially the system keeping the universe stable, and acts somewhat like the will of the universe as a whole. However, when someone dies, their soul can reject returning to the collective unconscious, and in doing so, they will become a Gnosis. These creatures exist only in the imaginary domain and must be materialized in the real domain in order to be defeated, and in Xenosaga games, this is usually done with a giant ether wave called the Hilbert effect. At the end of Future Connected, Shulk uses a concentrated wave of ether to materialize the Fog King so it could be defeated. We can tie this in with the Atom Phantasms as well. Atom's soul may have had a lot of regret about everything that happened with the Torn Incontinent and Mithra, and his soul may have essentially been chained to the world, leading to himself becoming a Gnosis. Since the Spirit Crucible is super dense with ether, he may have materialized automatically into a form that could be defeated. When he talks with Rex afterward, he appears to talk as himself despite his body being dead for years, suggesting that this is indeed Atom's soul reaching through to Rex somehow. And now that we are properly off track from what we were initially talking about, let's get back to how this is related to the Xenoblade 3 party here. For some reason, Ethel's red eye is causing her to see the party as fog creatures or Gnosis or whatever. This would suggest either she's looking at the party through the imaginary domain and not the real domain, or that some aspect of being part of Auroboris has led the party to have some Gnosis or Fog Beast-like features. We can get a bit more into that later in the trailer as it might provide some clarity, so let's move on. Tyon says after this, "Did they order you to kill Auroboris too?" Suggesting that there is another group or another person that is hunting down the party with whom the party has already met. Given that this goes to a new scene with Agnes technology and we see another new character here, there's a decently high chance that Tyon is talking to the new character we see here, and in the relationship chart might confirm that as well. We learn that this character is named Iserd. The chart says Isarugi, but this is before we had official confirmation. And what we do know is that he is Agnes's best tactician, the chief of military in Colony Lambda, which is on the Agnes continent, and that Tyon is a former subordinate of his, which would make sense since Tyon is also supposed to be the tactician of the party. Noah also immediately says after this that the world is their enemy, suggesting both countries we know of are hunting down and attacking the party when they are seen, which is pretty messed up from Nia and Melia, who we thought were good people. Now, I don't know about you guys, but Iserd here gives me some Ramses vibes by his appearance and overall demeanor, and he also seems to have a crazy-looking face with wrinkle lines everywhere, which might suggest a lack of sleep or something else going on with his personality, which might be being consumed by revenge, similar to Ramses. Here we also see that he has the exact same red eye as Ethel, except this time it is in his left eye. I would assume it functions identically to Ethel's, but just being in the other eye because he's part of the other country. We don't exactly know the significance behind left and right yet, but there seems to be some theme of unity with the main party at least. Afterward, it appears to cut back to the earlier scene with Ethel, and our party is running away, and we get confirmation that the party is indeed being chased by both nations at once, just in case that wasn't obvious just yet. As our party is running away from the Kevis attack, we get a line from Noah talking about how there must be a reason that they have met, and there has to be. Well, Noah, that's probably because Mr. Takahashi wrote it that way, but I guess for gameplay purposes, there's probably some kind of great destiny or fate going on here, as you might expect from a lot of RPG-like stories. And our main party is conveniently the group that has to save the world. Noah's Ark symbolism and all that, which I've discussed in a previous video. The next part of the trailer cuts to combat, which I spent a very long time talking about in my last video, so not going to dwell on these sections too long, but I do just want to say that it's possible I misunderstood the fusion art slightly, and that it may just be that the left side arts are a subclass type thing and just combine effects with the main art being used, which could suggest that you're not exactly using ally arts here or swapping between them, which also means that the tactics menu could actually be swapping party members, and I really hope that it is. If there's anything not combat related to notice in these clips, we can seemingly see the Orion Titan in the background of the first clip, and in the second clip we have Rotbart in the background, which is everyone's favorite level 81 gorilla in the starting area. The next clip seems to go back to an even earlier point in the story, likely being after the scene where the party meets in the first trailer, and after they stop fighting. The lighting and location are the same, and the party members' weapons do not have the Ouroboros symbols on them just yet. The party is seemingly being attacked by this horrifying looking monster which looks suspiciously like Groff from Xenogears and is probably a reference. After a couple shots of our party being on the back foot and just trying to survive, we get typical Xenoblade slowdown and a power awakening moment where we can hear Vandam, who seems to have the first name Gornika in this game, or however you pronounce this, Genika, I don't know. Which means that it is just an entirely new Vandam and he is this game's version of it, and he says that the kids share a common destiny. In the next few moments, we see Noah's right eye light up, and a few frames later we see Mio's left eye light up, which matches Ethel and Iserd from earlier. Noah comments that he can see Mio's thoughts, and then that they were a part of him before both protagonists drop the innuendo line of "How are you inside me?" and seem to be speaking in sync, which suggests their souls or something have been perfectly bonded. And as it turns out, they've transformed into a dark-looking mech-like creation, which is conveniently called an Auroboris. This transformation was likely brought about out of a desire to protect their friends or themselves from this monster. And wouldn't you know it, this new form that they've taken looks suspiciously like the Omega Universitas from Xenosaga 3. Just kidding, it looks like Veltal. Veltal just happens to be the mech of the main character of Xenogears Fei Fong Wong, and since Noah so far seems like he could be suspiciously similar to Fei, this is most likely intentional. On a more panning zoom-out shot, we can see some kind of energy core that appears within the chest of this Auroboris. Before we can see any more of that cutscene, it cuts to combat where the characters can use a feature called Interlink to summon these forms in combat to gain power for a set amount of time. I already went over this section, so let's move on to the story moments. The next thing we see is Blunz and Senna crying out for Noah and Mimi, presumably Mio, and out of the desire to save them, they also have a transformation sequence into an Ouroboros of their own. Blunz quotes Ryan, and I'm sure some people appreciated that, and then we get a shot of this Ouroboros. The transformation into an Ouroboros seems to have the characters' bodies completely dissolve almost into some wave of ether before recombining into this form, which has a couple of interesting implications I'll go over in a second. This Ouroboros is much larger, but also features the core in the chest area. It still features darker colors, and to be honest, I'm not quite sure if this is a reference to anything that's been used in the past, as it's a fairly unique design, but maybe I'm missing something. The next scene is Tyon confirming that the form comes from a strong desire or emotion, just like Super Saiyan and a ton of other power-ups in Japanese media. Nothing too surprising here, and we notice that every time these combination sequence happens, it involves the Kevis character's right eye and the Agnes character's left eye, and this combination gives us our only feminine-looking Ouroboros form, and of course the core is in an interesting location here because that is just something Choco would do. I think it looks pretty cool personally, at least. Now, if you ask me if there's any inspiration for this, it would most closely be the ES Zebulon from Xenosaga, as that mech also has the same designer, Choco. We get a shot of all three forms at once here, so it's a bit easier to see here, and one thing that might be worth noting is that each of the forms seem to take some physical characteristics of the Kevis characters, given the Lance one is huge, and the Uni one is feminine. Now, as mentioned, all of these designs were created by Choco, who has done a lot of mech designs for the series in the past, and also drew the Ghost for Xenoblade X, which these designs look similar to as well. Now, these forms don't exactly look like typical mechs and seem to have a core and ether lines throughout, but also have some kind of dark and alien-like appearances almost, and share a resemblance to the Ghosts from Xenoblade X that were unused. Interestingly enough about the Ghosts is that they were essentially Gnosis, just in a different game according to lore descriptions. If these Ouroboros forms are like Gnosis, which in this universe seem to be pretty similar to the Fog Beasts, that could explain why the perception of the party is seemingly like fog creatures to everyone with red eyes. If this unification of souls is able to create Gnosis inside the real domain for the purpose of fighting, that likely has a lot of implications as well, but I'm not exactly sure where it would go just yet, but it is something worth noting. If there's any other interesting remarks related to Xenoblade lore here, when Klaus did the experiment, he himself got split between Zanza and Klaus the Architect. Galea could have also been split and half of her been the Infernal Guldo enemy, which conveniently shares a model with the Fog King, though that isn't quite 100% confirmed. Now, despite the body seemingly splitting and maybe even having some form of consciousness or brain, the soul shouldn't be able to 100% split, as when Zanza was taken out, Klaus went along with him. That's how it should be, at least. However, this experiment did result in the Xenoblade 1 universe being created and the old Xenoblade 2 universe with the Earth being basically wiped of humanity. But if there was some kind of split of everything here, and these forms could be the right souls recombining from both worlds into some kind of true form. Now that's just getting into a lot of speculation, but the worlds combining obviously did something interesting given the 10-year time limit, and something else later in the trailer we'll discuss when we get there. Anyway, the forms are pretty sick and look fun to use in combat, and hopefully we'll have a cool lore explanation that was in front of us the whole time in both games. In the clips after this, there is footage of the other two forms in combat, and since we've gotten this far, I want to bring attention to the new clip that was posted on the Japanese Twitter today, showing earlier game combat with a party level of 13. In this clip, both interlinking and fusion do not seem to be options, which suggests that it hasn't been unlocked as a combat feature yet, but given the party's outfits, this is after Noah and Mio combined for the first time and the party is all together. This suggests it won't be a gameplay feature until either better control is established or all 6 party members can access the feature. It may also be that these forms are what allows for fusion arts to be a thing, and that unlocks the entire bottom left art palette. I got my friend Corey to translate some of the other stuff in this section where the party is not in combat, and we learned that the area name is the Eeks Wastelands, and the location within the area is the Great Plate of Rashin. And of course, current objective in the bottom right has returned, meaning there will be a navigation system for the main story and quests. Now, the location names are subject to change with localization, but it does appear one of the earlier areas is a wasteland, interestingly enough. This doesn't have a ton of relevance to the rest of the trailer, but it is worth mentioning, and to give some time frame on when Enel and Blunz and Uni and Tyon's first transformations happen. After that sequence of combat ends, we get to possibly the most interesting part of the entire trailer, and the most interesting thing lore-wise. In this part of the game, we see Noah as a child. Time appears to be stopped around him. He glances in the background and we see the whole freaking Earth. Now, Noah is part of the future of the Xenoblade 1 world, and the Earth is where the Xenoblade 2 world is. This suggests that this scene is showcasing the worlds combining. This means one of two things. Given that time appears to be stopped, this could just be Noah examining the past in some way to see when this event happened and is learning about it when he is a child, or it happened when Noah is a child here and there isn't much explanation for everyone being paused outside of some shenanigans with the worlds combining. Since Xenoblade 1 is a pocket dimension that was an offset of the Xenoblade 2 universe, this suggests that this dimension did indeed collapse, and now these two worlds are about to exist on top of each other. It's likely this could have been a mass extinction event or something similar, and if it happened when Noah was a child, it happened much more recently in this world's history than we thought. This could suggest that Albus did not foresee this event happening also, since he may have had no way of knowing his universe would collapse and be sucked into the main universe it was created from, since he might not be able to see the universe collapsing. Universal collapse and problems are definitely something that was present in Xenosaga though, and something similar could be returning here. I'm much more inclined to believe that the worlds are combining when Noah is a child than him just seeing the past, as if you look very closely at Noah's hand in this section, the tattoo is not there. Yes, the tattoo that is seemingly on most every character we have seen so far is just not on his hand as a child. The implications of this are pretty large when you consider the premise of the game of people being given 10 years to live. It's possible these tattoos are some kind of way to mark the time you have, and it's possible that if it fully fills up red or something, you might just straight up die. Given Ethel had no red in her tattoo earlier, this could also suggest that she is doing something to keep her time down as a military commander, and killing others could possibly give you a longer amount of time in this world, as I might have theorized in a different video. And perhaps normal citizens that don't fight have no way to refill their time, which may lead to a lot of early deaths, and if you aren't fighting to live, then you're going to die. Pretty morbid, I know. Now, the fact that Noah didn't have this mark as a child could also suggest that children just simply do not get this mark until a certain age, which means these countries could be doing this artificial limit on their own people for some reason, which seems really strange and messed up, but if they're trying to save their universe with this war and constant death cycle, it could make some sense at least. In Xenosaga, if the collective unconscious becomes unstable or collapses, the entire lower domain disappears, which is a huge multiverse, and if too many people reject this life and death cycle or don't die, that could lead to instability, which could be happening here. We do not know the exact reason for any of this yet, but we do know that Noah does not have the tattoo as a child, and at some point soldiers are given 10 years to live. Despite looking perfectly healthy, there seems to be a lot of people who could be close to their death. Perhaps at 10 years old is when this branding mark happened, since we've seen mention of child soldiers, and Mio seems to be concerned she doesn't have that long to live compared to everyone else and is only 19 years old. If killing truly does grant more life, it would also make Mio's actions in the first trailer make more sense, where she says they're fighting because there are enemies to kill. This could be a desperate move on her part to give herself more time. Regardless, I would bet the universe is combining, and the branding mark are things that will relate heavily to the premise of the game. The next shot has Melia telling subordinates of hers that all orders are rescinded and that they need to eliminate Auroboris at all costs, meaning that this is now their priority to them. And yes, this is Melia. The subtitles of the American trailer confirmed it, not that it was that hard to figure out. We don't know why specifically the main party seems to be such a threat to both nations or why Melia think they abhor this world, unless there's some twisted interpretation of hers where the party wants to end the terrible state of the world and apparently that means they hate the world. Which honestly, I think most people probably do if it's in that state. Maybe Melia really is just evil now, but who knows? But regardless, both nations seem to deem Auroboris to be a threat of utmost importance, possibly even above the war itself. This would suggest that Auroboris knows or possesses something that is a threat to both nations, and there's some massive misunderstanding going on given the red eyes and such. There isn't any real way of knowing too much more just yet. There does appear to be a machine or mech in the background with 2 different colored semicircles, but not any kind of unity like the Auroboris symbol. We have no way of knowing what this means either, but it is a change from the half circles we've seen so far. The next scene has Tyon being dumb and standing in the way of an attack while he's yelling at a former friend, presumably, and Uni being awesome dives and saves him. Ignoring the hair clipping, this is cool because I like Uni, so I'm glad we get an epic proactive girl moment. We also see Tyon's tattoo on the inside of his hand, once again confirming everyone has these. The next scene we get a brief shot of Nia again to remind us that she exists, and that's about it as far as her in this trailer. The voice line that starts playing here, however, has ESRB talking about him taking revenge, and that this is payback for Nimue dying with her wish unfulfilled. As of this specific moment in the trailer, we do not know who Nimue is, what her wish was, or how anyone in the party might have caused her to die with her wish unfulfilled. But it does seem to give ESRB motivation, so as expected, he's an angry boy seeking revenge. And wouldn't you know it, the very next frame we see a girl we haven't seen before, which we can likely assume is Nimue. Her hand seems to be either made of ice or crystallized in some way, and the same substance is making a horn come out of her forehead. Given the shading of the scene, we can assume it's a flashback, possible even of her death as she clutches something that could be an important item. We'll talk a bit more about her later when we get some additional context. The next line we get is to see our friend the scary-looking monster again, and at this point we can surmise that this might also be an Auroboris form of 2 characters or maybe even more than 2 characters. In the place where his core is, we see an infinity symbol instead of just the Auroboris symbol, which probably suggests he's a lot more powerful or has access to some power the party does not. Whoever makes up this Auroboris, we don't know, but knowing this series, I would bet it's a pretty shocking reveal later on. The voice line he says here is, "It's a wild ride, this passage of fate." Now, passage of fate is something Albus and Zanza talked about a lot in the first game, and fate is a pretty important thing throughout the entire series. We don't know exactly what this creature means here when he says this, but it could suggest something about fate being still predetermined to some extent somehow, or it could just be referencing previous characters as some kind of irony. It's also possible Albus or even Klaus could be part of this Auroboris, but I don't really like or believe that theory, so I hope it's not the case. We then get a shot of a green-haired Gormati using a bow. She's cute, and that's about all we know as of now. The next section has Noah sliding out a more traditional sword out of the red part of his sword like a hilt, and the red part transforming into a gauntlet on his left hand. Honestly, this is pretty cool and suggests weapons could morph in some way in the future and also affect combat. There is a frame where his arm looks to be detached, but in full speed you cannot see this at all, so who knows if this is intentional, but I guess it is possible he doesn't have an arm, so that's how he can combine this arm with part of a sword to make a gauntlet. Pretty cool regardless, and reminds me of some of the Cosmos transformations. The monster in the background also talks about how we have a nice little awakening, suggesting that perhaps the Auroboris form that Noah and Mio summoned is some sort of awakening he was trying to bring out or wanted to see. We don't know what happens after this in the cutscene, how they get away or anything like that, but it is an interesting line. Next part we see Uni with some type of weapon extremely close to her forehead. She seems to be wearing the outfit from before the parties joined up, and it looks like this may still be a part of the same fight scene and the attack likely just comes short of killing her as her life flashes before her eyes. The voice dialogue from Uni is asking why is her name on here? And to be honest, I'm not sure if this really related to what we're seeing here and it could be said somewhere else in the game. Besides being another Shion reference, probably not actually. We don't really know the context of this line, but based on what we might know about this game and how everything works, it is probably something messed up like your own country having some kind of list for execution or betrayal or who the heck knows. Or if it's related to this cutscene, perhaps her name is listed on the infinity symbol maybe? I really have no idea how to connect to this, and we probably need more context. The next scene has a Machina girl getting knocked back from a giant machine that looks like Kevis technology. This could suggest that Kevis, at least, is attacking its own people, maybe those that are refusing to contribute to the war effort or something like that, and that is just pretty messed up in general. Maybe they're just trying to continue the cycle by attacking their own people as well instead of just the enemies if they're not contributing to the war that they're trying to put on in any meaningful way. We don't know too much about this girl yet, but she does show up as one of the guest party members later, suggesting she'll be an ally of the party at some point. The next scene, we get a voice line from someone named Kamaravi, a lance user from Agnes. This cutscene appears to be some kind of fight scene between leaders of the two countries, and the new relationship chart backs this up, as it appears he is fighting Ethel. The chart says that these two are fated enemies. He is known as the Crimson Lotus, and does not seem to have any kind of relationship to the party currently, just that Mio has apparently heard of him. That is about all we know about him currently. It seems he and Ethel are using some kind of technology to fight each other, but it doesn't look like they are inside the mechs either, so who knows. The very next scene, Manana, who is one of the Nappan companions in this journey, who keeps appearing in cutscenes, mentions she will help with fighting as she spins on a pot lid. I wish I was making this up. And this segues into a gameplay section where we see her fighting alongside the other Nappan Riku as a guest party member. We also see Zeon, who does not appear to be in this trailer otherwise, who appears to be an even more diluted Hyentia than Uni with even shorter wings and with them being brown. He is a tank, and that's all we know. Noah talks about how he's never used this kind of blade before, but all the techniques are flashing before his eyes. This is just the gameplay feature of swapping weapons and classes, and they give a story justification for it. Not really much more to it than that. The next scene, we see Venom hitting some kind of Agnes technology out of anger, and he says the only thing that can change all of this is the will of Auroboris, so he definitely knows something and seems to be the catalyst for the party joining up. Given the last trailer, I would also not be surprised if he dies, just like the previous Vandom, and he seems to be directing the party to Sword March to find the real enemy. We don't know exactly what the will of Auroboris means just yet, but obviously the party linking and becoming Ouroboros, as well as the weapon symbols having that have something to do with it. I would guess that it's some overarching will and not just what the specific party wants, but there's no way of knowing that. In the next section, we see the party in a purple fog unsheathing their weapons. This suggests they're likely fighting some type of fog creasers or gnosis, which I bet has to do with the real enemy. The real enemy could have also been some kind of catalyst behind the worlds colliding if the original Fog King was also a result of this real enemy. Maybe experimentation with dimensional portals and all that. He could also be pulling the strings behind the war as well. There's definitely a lot of interesting implications here. The next line is not actually from Senna or Mio. According to the English trailer, this is from Nimue, who was mentioned earlier as dying with her wish unfulfilled and likely appearing in the flashback. She says, "Not that I have all that much time to spare, but soon." It is very possible that if the earlier scene was Nimue's death scene, then she knew she was going to die soon and had limited time, and it's very possible she may be an example of someone whose 10-year time limit ran out. That crystallization or ice feature could even be the mark killing her or transforming her or something similar. There's no way to know this just yet, but based on this line, she was saying something important to either some of the party members in the past, or at the very least knew something important, not that we got to hear what it is since it cuts to Mio right after that. We also don't know if this has anything to do with her dying with her wish unfulfilled or how that happens, but we do know that ESRB is mad about it. We see Mio holding her journal, where it appears that she is crossing out days and counting down the days she has left to live as of right now. This goes along with us knowing she has less time than the rest of the party, and likely giving us a bigger sense of urgency about the situation. The final line of the trailer is Mio saying, "Finding a path that lets all of us live. I will make that my mission." This seems to go along with all that we know so far, searching for a way to remove this 10-year time limit, searching for a way to end the war and allow everyone to live. Given the premise of the game, this definitely makes sense as a goal for the party. The final scene appears to be the party right when they officially become a party since they're wearing their former military outfits, and we see blue ether particles going up into the atmosphere like what happens when an Offseer plays a flute for the dead. This could suggest that Vandom dies or someone close to the party or even the monster dies here. Regardless, this is the end of the trailer before the logo appears. A somber note to end on, but it does a very good job of making you really want to play the game at least. At the very end of the trailer, we see an art book that shows Mio as a child, suggesting that even if she is some type of flesh eater, she still grew up normally. This also suggests that all the blades might have been normal as far as how they grew up and came into existence in this world. The dress she's wearing could be a reference to Nephilim from Xenosaga, who is already a reference to Ellie. We have no real way of knowing, but given the Noah Faye parallels, this could be what they're going for. That covers it for the trailer. A lot of information, but there's still some more stuff to go through. So what else do we know about the game? Well, for one, we have the full relationship chart here I was talking about earlier. This confirms our interlinked pairs and shows that Nia and Melia are indeed queens of their respective nations. We learn the Nappan tagging along seem to be in charge of weapon maintenance and cooking, and you can't have a Xenoblade game without the Nappan companions, and this also gives us an insight about the relationships between the interlink pairs. Taion and Yunie's especially funny here since Taion thinks she has an attitude, so you already know they're going to have a great dynamic. It appears party roles or default classes are also listed here. I'm not going to go through every little blurb here as you can read it yourself, and a lot of it we already knew. Senna wanting to clear up Blunz is pretty great though. Next thing we got is ESRB information. There's not exactly too much here, but does talk about some of the more violent scenes, like a couple suicides with both a stabbing and a shooting, a lot of violence, minor amounts of blood, some deep cleavage and partially exposed breasts because this is a Xeno game, and some terrible curse words I will definitely not be repeating here because of how nasty and awful they are, so feel free to read them yourselves. This info shows it may be a bit darker than former Blade games, probably won't be as dark as Gears and Saga, but that's expected since this is a Nintendo game. Finally, there is a bit more information that has been released on the Japanese Twitter page, and we'll probably get some more in the days to come. There is a brief overview and official art of all three Auroboris forms, and we learned that these pairs are essentially static pairs, and we also learned that Yunie and Taion Auroboris can revive all dead party members, which was not a listed art in the gameplay, suggesting that you unlock more abilities as the game progresses. We also learned that soldiers in this world will summon their own weapons, and that these weapons are called blades. So that is the blades in this game. In X, it was an organization. In 2, it was the actual things you summoned from core crystals. In this game, it just seems to be the weapons. All weapons seem to be referred to as blades, so even the hammer can be a blade in this game. And it seems like they just summon it, I guess, with some kind of ether ability. They can just summon it out of nowhere at any time, like it's a specific weapon like that. They can probably do it with other weapons as well, since they can swap classes and all that, so it's really interesting how this might have happened. We don't know if it's related to some kind of UMN-like system like Xenosaga had, where you could just summon weapons essentially from out of nowhere just with special abilities. Regardless, though, it could be a very interesting system if some of the party could, like, master summoning a bunch of different weapons at once. As of right now, there isn't really any other new information I haven't already discussed in this video. I'm sure there'll be more information released in the coming days, as I said earlier, so I probably will make a brief recap video at some point in the future related to all of that. But for this video, I think that's probably going to cover it for now. I gave a couple theories, went over all the information we know, how it might connect to previous games, and I hope you guys may have learned something from this and are looking forward to my future content. If you are, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, comment, follow me on all the relevant social media. You know how it works at this point. And yeah, I guess that's really all I have to say. Thank you all so much for watching and have a wonderful and blessed day.